You may have heard of the English expression, well, if you can't beat them, join them. What is the role of computers in chess nowadays? Well, in previous years, we used to think that we could actually beat them. But nowadays, the computers are so strong that we just use them as tools to help us improve at chess and to analyse our own games. However, back in 2004, Sergei Karjakin was one of a select few members of the last decade, actually, to even beat a computer. Here he played in the Bilbao human versus computer match that they held in 2004 in Bilbao. And Karjakin managed to actually beat the computer junior from the rising position as we see here. Okay, Karjakin's strategy is one that many people have against computers, which is don't play tactically. Computers are complete tactical monsters, and if you open up the position, you're leaving yourself wide open to the tactical minefield in which they are extremely strong at. So, what is White's strategy in this position? Well, I think Sergei's picked a very nice opening to play, actually, against the computer, because the position is fairly closed, and it's going to be more about manoeuvring rather than direct tactics in these kind of positions. Karjakin played a very nice move, knight a5, and his idea is, okay, not only to hit the pawn on b7, but he has this middle game strategy of advancing on the queen side with b4 and potentially with c5 at some moment. Black could hardly envisage playing b6 because now the knight comes into the lovely square on c6. So Black would have to struggle along with something like queen c7. And here we see Karjakin putting his idea into perfection. He's very careful to avoid any play from the computer. Remember, the computer is going to tactically outwit him in practically every single position. So he's going to play very carefully, very steadily. And we've seen Karjakin be able to do this in his games where he has a strategy. Of course, he remains flexible with his strategy, but he's very careful to avoid any tactics. If you check the game against Alexei Shirov from a few chapters ago, it highlights exactly how Karjakin is very strong in those types of positions. And this position is no different. So, rook e1, and just mobilising the rooks. Again, very sensible chess. Knight b8. Well, I think the point about that move was Black wants to be able to play b6 and not allow the knight in here. But that's not really something to be too worried about. So rook c1. Why did Karjakin put the rooks on those squares? As we've just said, White wants to try and push c5, so he wants to defend the pawn on d5, and he knows where the best squares to connect the rooks are. When you have connecting rooks like that, you should decide where you want to put both rooks before you move even one of them. That is why Karjakin played rook f to d1, because he knew that the other rook wanted to go to c1. e4. Now, as we said, do you want to open up the position against the computer and allow tactics? No, you don't. f4, keeping the position closed. And it's very difficult for Black to do anything here. The perfect style to play against a computer. Just stop them doing anything. Queen d7 and c5. Well, when I said we should stop them doing anything, doesn't mean that we have to stop doing what we want to do. Here we see Karjakin notices that c5 is a very safe move to play, and it also allows White to try and hone in on this b6 square. So, there's potential ideas now of knight c4 to b6, and that will pressurise Black's position even further. Another idea is this idea of playing c6 and trying to smash Black on the queen side. Again though, opening up the position for tactics would have to take extreme care on Karjakin's part, so he's only going to consider these ideas at the moment. Now it's understandable why the computer opened up the position, but what it allowed is White's terrific d-pawn charging up the board, and Black will always have to worry about this. Look at the scope of Black's pieces. The bishop can't really move anywhere. Yes, the knight can go to c6, but that's not, it's a normal kind of square. What about the queen? Well, the queen now can't do anything down the d file. It can go over to f5, but again, not super effective. The rook on e8, well, it's on a closed file, isn't it? The knight on f6, it can go to g4, but that's about it really. So again, good strategy from Karjakin here, but nothing has been achieved yet. He needs to still break through the Black position. Let's see how he manages to do this. So knight c6 and knight c4. When you have a space advantage, as I've mentioned in a few other videos, try and keep the pieces on. And rook b1, changing the direction of the rook, because now this pawn is the new target. Remember, flexibility with his planning. And rook b3. I really like Karjakin's idea of just moving the pieces around, being very careful. Knight d5. You might have asked, why didn't he go d7? Well, after rook d8, it's unclear as to whether the pawn is very strong there now, because black now has a lot of pieces attacking it. And we don't really want white's pieces to be just defending it. The pawn is just as strong on d6 because it's protected by a fellow pawn, and therefore white has got no worries about this pawn whatsoever. So you don't want to just throw the pawn at the board willy-nilly. You really want to kind of think about whether it would be weak or not. Okay, knight d5. And a few pieces came off, but now this entailed the white bishop to come to a better square. Possibly Karjakin decided on this idea of swapping the knights off because he was a little bit worried about knight g4, which would attack the bishop on e3. So now the knight on f6 has been captured off. The bishop can come to c4 safely. a5. And now probably my favourite move of the game. There's many moves that white can play, of course, because he has a big space advantage. He has the two bishops against the bishop and knight. And we always talk about how the bishops like open positions. But I really like his next move, a3. Just putting the pressure on black by saying, okay, what are you going to do next? This prevents any business with knight b4. Yes, black can go a4, but the pawn can't go any further. And lastly, it just puts the pressure on black, doesn't it? It just says, do something. Show me what you're going to do. You've got no tactics, and I can see that. Rook a8. Hardly the move the computer wanted to play. Rook b5. Again, just keeping control. Maybe this prevented queen g4 ideas. And bishop d5, just slowly creeping forward. Now this move is another oddity, because why would you play king f2? But if you go back to I believe it was the first game of Karjakin in this DVD, where he played against Kononenko, he actually played a very similar move, didn't he? He moved his king from g8 to f7 in that game, and there were all the major pieces on like we see here. So what's the idea? Well, Karjakin has decided that I can just safely go after this pawn, and the piece I'm not using at the moment is the king. And because I have such control of the position, I can just go g4 and king g3. That's a very grandmasterly idea to do, because not many of us would even consider using the king in this position. We'd probably think about moves like rook b1 to try and hit the pawn, possibly something like queen c4 to eye up a lot of these pawns. I mean, they're all good moves, of course. But Karjakin has noticed an extra feature of the position. So bishop f6, well, this clearly shows black doesn't really have a lot. Rook b1. I think, though, the point of bishop f6 was that if white now goes g4, black can play bishop h4 check, and that would be slightly annoying. So, what do? Bishop g7, and now the time is right to go g4, because there is no annoying check on h4. And it's really impressive to see how black's position has been reduced to complete passivity. I mean, this last move completely typifies this whole idea, actually, of g5, keeping the position closed against the computer. And after queen h7, well, it defends the pawn, but now what it doesn't do is defend something on the other side. And Karjakin just decided to win the pawn. Amazing enough, well, or unamazing enough, the computer decided to resign, because these pawns are now going to be pushed down the board and there's nothing black can do about it. So beating the computer in 2004 was, I believe he was the only one of the whole of the human team to beat this computer, despite being the lowest rated player with 2591 rating. A very impressive feat, and it really showed his growing stock at that time.